Welcome, everyone, to the MASSP podcast. My name is Ryan Casey. MHSAA Executive Director Mark Ewell joins the podcast once again, this time to discuss the upcoming winter season. We cover some basketball changes, as well as some newsworthy announcements MHSAA has recently shared in regard to participation rates, tournament attendance records, retirement bills, and more. We always enjoy having Mark on the podcast and look forward to another return for the spring season. Enjoy. So enjoy your ride to or from school, your run on the treadmill, or however you like to listen, because another MASSP podcast episode starts now. All right, well, Mark, thank you so much for once again joining the MASSP podcast. You are almost through the thick of it. Fall season is almost done, but it looks like you're going to survive and be ready for the next season.
We are really good fall. We're down to 16 schools yet. The finish line is clearly in sight. Really solid fall overall. I think COVID is completely in the rearview mirror, knock on every piece of wood that I have here in my office. Crowds were solid this fall. Our weather was pretty good. Ironically, our worst weather for our fall championships were our two earliest ones, tennis and golf finals in mid-October. We had all that rain and kind of a cold, dreary weekend, but weather's been great. We've had semifinal games the last 2 years in football played in snow. It was sunny and 48 this past Saturday. So a very normal fall, a very successful fall, and we look forward to a strong finish here on Thanksgiving weekend.
Awesome. Well, normal is always good. So for those who don't realize it, you and I had a chance to talk on a previous podcast episode just as we went into the fall season. And this is going to be hopefully a continuation of that, and we'll do it again in the spring and for more episodes to come, and just finding ways for obviously MHSAA members, MASSP members, to be able to coordinate and collaborate a little more. We know it's really important, the relationship between the principal and the athletic director and coaches and whatnot. So we just thought this would always be a good opportunity just to make sure everyone's up to speed on different upcoming events or important rule changes and whatnot. And so we're going to jump right in and get started once again as we shift the focus now onto winter. So, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Mark, up next we have boys and girls basketball, bowling, skiing, swim and dive, and wrestling, and then girls gymnastics and competitive cheer, and ice hockey for boys. So I'm just curious, as we're kind of transitioning to winter, what makes winter sports unique? Do we see any sort of change? Maybe is there an uptick in participation now that school has settled down and maybe transient kids have, found a place to be? Does it seem to stay flat every year? I'm just curious, kind of, what are the differences?
So winter, I think from an administrative perspective, I always thought was the hardest season of any. During the fall, we have some great fall weather in Michigan. So yeah, we may have some events on evenings or weekends, but heck, I'm outdoors and the weather's great. The winter gets really long for administrators because unless you have alpine ski, everything is indoors. And with sometimes a basketball season, if our basketball teams aren't doing real well, you get into late January, that month of February, every night in the gym, that can really be a long stretch. So we have our state conference for our athletic directors, the MIAAA, that happens in March. And a lot of times that turns into a little bit of group therapy after a long winter season for a lot of our ADs. I often have said, if you can survive the winter, it's not just an athletic director, but I think even any building administrator, it's really the dog days of the school year. A lot of times your car pulls into the parking lot when it's dark, and those nights where you have evening events, your car doesn't leave until it's dark. And, it's kind of that push to spring break, which really makes the winter so tough. So other than my phone being paged here, but no, the winter does have those unique challenges that way. I do think from a health and safety perspective, a big initiative that we continue to look at is how can we improve our emergency planning and work with our schools. And a huge part of that, obviously, is when you have cardiac emergencies. We've done some surveying of all of our schools, and the thing I feel really good about, Ryan, during the winter is almost 99.5% of schools' AEDs are in the gym area, which for the winter, that's where all of our events happen. Conversely, I get a little bit more nervous in the fall and in the spring when we have teams spread out all over the place, you know, a cross-country team. You know, our tennis courts are down the street behind an elementary. Our softball field, we play down at the city park. Well, now if you have that emergency that comes up, you know, do we have mobile AED units, those kinds of things. So whenever we talk winter, I often say I sleep the soundest during the winter because again, we are indoors and everything is more centralized in the winter than it is in the other two seasons. I think our emergency planning is a little more ready. The other thing that you also worry about with everybody being indoors in one place is just basic event security procedures. And I think, again, hopefully this podcast will just kind of plant that seed, or perhaps at, you know, your next administrative team meeting, you can kind of just run through that checklist of what is our indoor emergency plan? Where is that AED, whether it be in the gym or the pool, if your school has that. And then when we're hosting all of these indoor events night after night, what are the basic plans that come up from a security standpoint or medical emergency, all those things. So the winter, again, it's long, it's challenging, but I think if we can survive the winter, we hit spring break, the weather gets better, and then we head back outdoors.
Absolutely. And as a former administrator talking here, I always enjoyed spring. A lot of those events started earlier in the day, so you got home a little earlier, so that was
Absolutely.
nice, right? So shifting into a sports-specific question here for you, Mark. I know this just because my daughter is a high school basketball player. She is a freshman, and she just finally got to have her tryouts yesterday. Was day one, which seems much later than normal. So am I right in that assumption? It was later, and if so, why is it starting later this year?
So I'll ramble here slightly when we talk winter calendars. So one thing we did 2 years ago is we added 2 additional basketball games. But at that same time, what we did was we actually shortened basketball seasons by 1 calendar week. So in other words, we shortened the window. We used to make basketball teams practice for 2.5 weeks before you could play a game. That is now shrunk. I mean, we were making basketball teams practice longer than football teams in the fall before they could play their first game. So we shrunk that kind of opening period. And because our final dates were set on the back end of the calendar, a lot of times it's through contracts with Michigan State and the Breslin Center. If you're going to trim a week from the season, then it delayed practice by a week. So that's why it feels like we're starting later, because we shrunk the season by a week, and the shrink was on the front end of the calendar. Now, one thing that we are going to look at with our board here when we next meet on December 1, and these conversations will continue into the spring, is taking the entire winter calendar. Do we want to move it earlier? The thing that I've noticed over the last 10 years, in those listening who sit in the principal's chair, all of our spring breaks now happen earlier than they ever have before. I bet, Ryan, when you and I were in high school, spring breaks were always the first week of April, or depending on your district, it might have been connected to Easter in some way. Well, now with the state testing window, schools are now moving their break to that last weekend or that last week in March. So we get our kids back for a week before we test that week after. Well, we're having now, with our last weekend of basketball championships in March, over half of our schools are already on break for that end of the winter season. So we're going to look at moving to where both of our basketballs end by about the 20th of March each year, which completely clears the decks for whenever the school does take their spring break. It actually gives spring sports a little more time. I just think that the winter in general goes on too long. So
yeah.
So we're going to look to try and shorten that and at least move it a little earlier on the calendar to avoid the earlier spring break kind of overlapping with the end of winter. So stay tuned, but do know that's one of the big discussion points that our board will take on here leading up to May of next year.
Well, that is good to know. Thank you for sharing that. Sticking with basketball, I think really it sounds like maybe winter season rule change related item, again, sticking in basketball, has to do with the foul change or how we're addressing 1-and-1s or counting free throws. And the only reason I know this is because I got to run the clock for my middle school daughter's basketball game. And so it's kind of a mind shift for me of when we're going to reset the count and that sort of thing. Can you just talk about that change and maybe why that happened?
So this is a big change. Now, this is a national playing rule change. So the National Federation, they write the playing rules that are used in all 50 states. They kind of took the lead of college women's basketball when it comes to fouls and free throws. So starting this year, and those of you that are at a basketball game, this is a big change. What we now do is once a team during a quarter gets 5 team fouls, the other team is now in the bonus. Whenever there's a shooting foul or a foul is against the team that is committed at least 5 fouls in the quarter, the other team will go to the line and shoot 2 shots. So the 1-and-1 is completely gone from high school basketball. So during the first quarter, both teams commit 5 fouls in the first quarter. Both teams are in the bonus. The first quarter ends, and we reset the team fouls for both teams to 0. And I think the reason for this change is a lot of times you'd have a game, and it could be at the varsity level, and Ryan, more commonly, it was at the JV or freshman level, that you have a foul fest early in that first quarter. Well, under the old rules, once you got to 17 fouls, you were shooting free throws for every foul the rest of the half. Well, now, if you have a physical first quarter with a bunch of fouls, you start the second quarter, it's kind of hitting the reset button. That now for every foul, we're not going to the foul line, and hopefully the game has a little bit better flow. Again, it's not turning into the old Knights of Columbus free throw shooting contest. So each quarter we'll reset the team fouls. Personal fouls stay, but we reset the team fouls, and by the way, getting rid of 1-and-1s. We're also hoping that now in the fourth quarter, if a team is behind, your way to catch up is going to be to try and make steals and play defense rather than just continue the foul fest and send a team to the line, hoping they miss the front end of a 1-and-1. Now, when you know it's 2 shots, maybe we'll see less fouling at the end of the game. So that was the mindset behind the rule change from the Federation. And I, like everybody, I've got a high school basketball player myself, our daughter's team. So we'll see how all this plays out.
Absolutely. And I didn't realize that was a national level thing. So that's interesting to see how that affects, all the states. So I was looking online the other day, Mark, and I saw that MHSAA announced that you had reached like a 6-year high for your tournament attendance. This was for last school year. So I'm just curious, is that something that's coming off the heels of COVID, or maybe why do you think you saw that rise, and are you expecting similar results this year?
2 reasons, and I'm going to be a little careful with the second reason. It'll be a little tongue in cheek, but I'm also going to tell the truth. The first reason, without question, is a post-COVID bump. I think because of the lockdown followed by the very limited participation, limited spectators. I really think that whole miserable experience that we as educators had during COVID, I think there's more of an appreciation for something when you no longer have it. So I think that now you're getting parents and relatives and community members and students going to high school events is a big deal again. So I think without question, there's a certain bounce out of the pandemic. The second reason is because of the pandemic, all of our tournaments, we now use digital tickets. And I'm just going to tell the truth. Prior to digital tickets, a host school would sell tickets. They would collect cash at the door. And a lot of times that money then went to their business office. And then after local expenses got paid, a check of the remainder would then get sent on to the MHSAA along with the number of tickets that were sold locally. And that's how we built that data. Well, now with digital tickets, that revenue comes directly to us within 10 days of the tournament. And while I'm not saying that folks were not being fully accurate or fully transparent with the number of tickets being sold at the gate, or we're letting these people in or not charging those folks. I just think we now get a much more true reading of the actual number of tickets sold. And now what we do is, after we then get that revenue on the front end, we then send that money back to our host schools for reimbursement following the tournament. So that model has changed. I know that there are varying opinions about digital tickets. I do know that when I talk with superintendents and school business officials, they love the fact that we now have better internal controls. There is far less cash, at least in our tournaments. There's no cash that is going in and out of the hands of school employees and the accounting and those things that come with it. And because of that, I think a lot of schools, for the regular season, your own events, have really looked now hard at digital tickets, because it's just a lot safer for everybody involved. So yes, we're happy the numbers are up. I think it's, again, the post-pandemic bounce, along with just a different way of kind of that whole ticket structure working. And very pleased with a really good year last year.
I didn't even think to consider the digital ticket aspect, so that makes a lot of sense now that you shared that. So moving on to my next question for you. I know both MHSAA and MASSP both supported a bill to allow retirees to stay employed by districts to help with the educator shortage and sub shortage, as well as for coaches. So can you just share why MHSAA supported this bill and what it means to athletic programs that are desperately searching to fill those coaching vacancies?
I'm nearing the 30-year mark in my educational career. And I often, say that, for my first 25 years, I'd ask a school person, what's your biggest challenge? And the answer always was money. I asked school people that same question here in the last, let's say, 3 to 4 years. And the answer now is never money. The answer is always people. Mark, we can't find people to substitute teach. We can't find people to drive bus. We can't find people to coach. And for our legislature a year ago last summer to say, now's the time that we want to take a pool of recent retirees and make it harder for those folks to come back and work on a part-time limited basis as they kind of transition into retirement. A lot of those folks, I'm done with the day-to-day grind of the classroom, or I'm done with the day-to-day grind of the assistant principal and the kids in and out of my office. However, I'm not ready to completely walk away, and I want to continue to coach cross country, which I've done for the last 15 years. So with the change to the retirement law, we feel like we have something that is now common sense, that when that person does retire, during that first 6 months, they're able to come back and work on a limited basis, as long as that the earnings during that window, that 6-month window, stay under, $15,200, which is that number. So what that will do is that would allow that recent retiree in June to come back and to coach that fall sport, or to sub a day or two a week. And as long as they stay under that limit during that first 6 months, their pension is unaffected. So this will help us for coaches. This will actually help us for retired public school folks who also officiate, because ORS told us, well, no, if a referee is being paid by a reporting unit, that's an issue too. So we feel like we got a lot of the biggest hurdles off the track with the updated law. And again, I give the legislature, as angry as I was a year ago last summer, I give them credit for saying, yep, we made a mistake here, we missed this, and it has opened up a group of people again that our schools can use.
And I didn't even think about the impact on officials. I was thinking about coaches and principal lens, teaching vacancies. So that's interesting as well. NFHS put out an article the other week, and they were talking about just the participation numbers throughout the country in different states. And it looks like Michigan is a top 10 state for both boys and girls athletics. So is there anything else those metrics tell us about our athletic programs here in Michigan? How does those rankings compare maybe to years past? Any light you can shed on those numbers?
So I think the biggest takeaway is the fact that our participation numbers have either stayed level or have even had slight increases, while the overall student population in our state has steadily decreased over the last 20 years. We have 750 member high schools. As we sit here today, we do not have a single school any more larger than 3,000 students. The biggest high school in our state is 2,900 students, and that currently is East Kentwood over in the Grand Rapids area. Right behind them is Dakota High School in Macomb County, and they're at like 28 something. So you go back 10 years ago and we had 15 schools that were all bigger than 3,000 kids. So our schools themselves are smaller than they were. You look at the ranges of class A, B, and C and D today versus where we were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or 20 years ago. Our schools have less kids in them. Our population in Michigan is down over that same period, but the part that we feel really good about is when you look at our participation numbers, we're solidly still in that top 10. So what it says is even with a few less students, we're getting kids to still participate in the 31 different sports that we right now offer for both boys and girls. And that's something to really be proud of.
Absolutely. That was something, as a principal, that I could always point to, especially kids who come to your school that are new, right? Obviously, in accordance with eligibility rules and transferring and stuff. But that was one thing we always encourage. You want them to be part of something after school so they can get a sense of community, get some friends. And so, that was something, as a principal, we always try to promote, get involved in as many after school things, including athletics, as you can for a lot of those reasons. But last one here, Mark, and then we'll get you on your way. It looks like applications for the Scholar Athlete Awards are now available and posted online on the MHSAA website. What do you want building leaders and administrators to know about this program, and why should they be encouraged to nominate deserving students from their schools?
So this is one of the longest standing programs we have. It's the MHSAA Scholar Athlete Award. All of the college scholarships that go to our 32 recipients are all underwritten by Farm Bureau. So Farm Bureau has been a wonderful partner. It's a way for them to give back. For years, it was $1,000 scholarship. And what Farm Bureau, again, looking at the cost of college and here over the last, just after COVID, they actually doubled the dollar amount to those scholarships. So it's a $2,000 scholarship. It goes to 32 winners. The application process now is exclusively online. So go to MHSAA.com, click on either the administrators button or student button, and you can find the application there where all materials can be submitted. That deadline, we're about 10 days out. So it is important for, nominations to come in. We then have a couple of different committees that we bring together who go through and read those essays and score the applications. And finally, it's a 3-step process until we name our 32 winners in March. So one of our again, a longstanding program, really thankful to Farm Bureau for underwriting all the cost of this. We host our 32 winners at Breslin in conjunction with our basketball finals. It's a wonderful way to really recognize some outstanding kids. And that process ready to start here in earnest just around the corner.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time, Mark. I know you've got to prepare for some finals here to wrap up the fall season and then right back at it into the winter season. So appreciate the insight that you provide and look forward to hopefully doing this again as we start the spring season here a few months down the line. So really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan, and just appreciate everything that our building leaders do. We could not do this without you. And again, happy holidays to everybody and a big thanks.
And that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening to the MASSP podcast. Remember, you can listen to this podcast and others anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Just search for MASSP or hit the subscribe button right now.